Support for NPR and the following message come from Pete and Jerry's Eggs. Their new organic pasture-raised eggs come from hens that roam lush pastures and enjoy a USDA-certified organic diet. The result? Delicious, ethical, healthy eggs as nature intended. Learn more at peteandjerrys.com.
Hey everyone, you're listening to Code Switch, the show about race and identity from NPR. I'm B.A. Parker.
And I'm Gene Demby. Parker, in your wide-ranging social media travels journeys, have you ever come across this couple, Simone and Malcolm Collins?
Oh, yeah. They're this hipster couple. Mm-hmm. They're white, youngish, or at least millennial. Yeah. Very cool glasses. Mm-hmm. I feel like I've seen their glasses and been like, oh, they're like mine, which, okay.
They have 7 kids, and there are countless TikToks about the Collinses, people offering up commentary on them and all them kids. They've been featured in write-ups in the Washington Post and Politico and, NPR, so many other places. And this couple argues that it's imperative that couples like them, couples who are educated, who have progressive stances on a lot of social issues, who are atheists and have high IQs.
I'm sorry, people who talk about having high IQs is always a big yikes for me.
Hold that thought, Parker. So the Collinses say that the fate of the world might depend on couples like them having as many kids as possible so that their values and that their intelligence does not die out. There's this write-up of them in the British newspaper, The Telegraph, which is a liberal newspaper, with the headline, "Meet the elite couples breeding to save mankind."
There it is. Yep. That's my yikes. Because it's giving eugenics.
I mean...
Okay, but yet, Gene, I know what the Collinses call themselves. Pronatalists.
Pronatalism literally just means in favor of birth.
That's Julia Black. She's a reporter, usually focused on tech, and she's done a lot of reporting on pronatalism.
It usually appears in a kind of nationalist context. It's usually not just the idea that someone is in favor of birth, but in favor of a specific type of birth. So historically, that's kind of played out different nations wanting more citizens and wanting more people in the economy, wanting more soldiers.
Mm-hmm.
She first heard the term around 2022. That's also when she met the Collinses.
There was a group at the time that was very intentionally trying to recoin this word. And I met this couple, Simone and Malcolm Collins, who are the founders of the Pronatalist Foundation. And they were specifically really trying to inject that word and these ideas back into mainstream conversation. And frankly, they've had some success.
I'll be known as the fertilization president, and that's okay. That's not bad.
I mean, the last few years, this has grown as a movement and also grown in people's awareness to the point where it came up in the presidential election. You hear about it on the news.
Donald Trump and his administration are apparently brainstorming ways to persuade women to have more babies.
Welcome your Vice President of the United States, JD Vance.
So let me say very simply, I want more babies in the United States of America.
This pronatalism idea, that people absolutely need to be having more kids, or at least the right people need to be having more kids, is kind of having a moment.
Yep, Elon Musk, who is the father of more than a dozen kids, he is on his wave too.
Elon Musk is on a mission to make more babies.
I think for most countries, they should view the birth rate as the single biggest problem they need to solve.
Elon Musk says there just aren't enough kids being born to keep the world going. And even if your boy, Elon, has fallen out of favor with Donald Trump, he has an ally in the pronatalism movement in Vice President JD Vance.
Then you have tradwives and quiverfuls, the latter of whom are part of an evangelical movement whose members don't use birth control because they say it's God's will that they be fruitful and multiply.
But it wasn't all that long ago that the big birth rate panic was not that too few babies were being born and that would lead to societal collapse, but that too many babies were being born and that would lead to societal collapse.
Pick a lane, people.
Right? That theory, which was less like Children of Men, Handmaid's Tale, and more like Ugly's Pretty Specials, that theory was called the population bomb. And it got a lot of press attention back in the 1960s.
The U.S. could be busting out at the seams by the end of the century.
If we do not, by humane means, limit our numbers, then numbers are going to be limited by more famines and shortages and consequent social conflicts.
Back then, there were a lot of really influential people who were thinking big thoughts about the world's population, and they wanted to influence what that future might look like. Back then, they thought the world's population was going to explode sometime in the very near future, and that there will be way too many people and not enough resources for them all. And they were trying to sound the alarm that time was running out to do something about it.
And listener, that's what our episode is about this week. We're talking about why and how the government and other people in power have been concerned about how many babies are born or not in the world.
And we're going to try to draw a line between those plotting on a new baby boom and these previous concerns, because they are sampling and remixing some old ideas that are finding some very amenable ears in the age of Trump. Do you think we can get through this episode without making the canon joke?
We might.
Let's see.
I mean,
This message comes from Charles Schwab. When it comes to managing your wealth, Schwab gives you more choices, like full-service wealth management and advice when you need it. You can also invest on your own and trade on Thinkorswim. Visit schwab.com to learn more. This message comes from NPR sponsor Pete and Jerry's Eggs, inviting you to tag along with one of their organic, pasture-raised hens as she heads out for her day in the pasture. She and her friends start to roam and forage, hunting for tasty organic snacks. And with 108 square feet per hen, there's plenty of space for everyone. Under the open sky, they can hear songbirds nesting in the trees. They bask in the sounds of nature as they prepare to lay their rich, delicious eggs. And when the sun starts to set, the crickets begin to sing. Time to catch one last squiggly snack before bedtime. To learn more about Pete and Jerry's organic pasture-raised eggs and the certified humane farms where their hens roam, visit peteandjerrys.com.
This message is sponsored by DSW, the birthplace of the humble brag. Full of all kinds of shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. And when there are never-ending options for every style, mood, occasion, and budget, there is unlimited freedom to play. And that's something to brag about. So go ahead, stock up on fresh sneakers from your favorite brands, or try those boots you always secretly knew you could pull off. Find the shoes that get you at prices that get your budget. DSW, let them surprise you.
All right, Gene, I know how much you like to nerd out about history, so put on your professor glasses and take it away.
I mean, I make it look good, though. You know, got a little tweed situation on, you know. All right. Before we get into pronatalism, we got to talk about this other panic about how many people were being born, right? But in this case, it was about too many kids being born. So I need to introduce you to Emily Merchant.
I am an associate professor of science and technology studies at UC Davis.
And Emily researches the history of demography. So basically, she studies what we can learn by looking at history through the lens of all the numbers that are used to quantify things about people.
Ooh, specific nerdom. I love it.
Emily told me that there was a lot of people involved in fanning the flames over this panic about this oncoming overpopulation crisis. But the most famous town crier for this idea was this dude named Paul Ehrlich. Ehrlich was a biologist at Stanford University, and in 1968, he wrote this treatise about the dangers of overpopulation that became a sensation.
A small paperback book called The Population Bomb.
The Population Bomb?
Dun, dun, dun. Yeah. And his idea in that book was that there was barely enough space and food for the 3.5 billion people who were living on the planet back in the 1960s, and that it was all going to get much, much worse as the population grew by billions over the next few decades, as predicted. And that book got a lot of attention, and lots of sober-minded news outlets covered it and his ideas. But Emily said Ehrlich and so many of the people who were worried about overpopulation like him were all cribbing from one particularly influential Englishman from way back in the 18th century, a guy named Thomas Robert Malthus.
He is also sometimes seen as the father of demography, maybe to some extent economics as well.
Malthus was from this aristocrat family. He became a pastor. He became a prominent thinker. And he threw cold water on the conventional wisdom at the time, which is that having a country with a whole lot of people was like obviously a good thing.
Population growth is a source of economic dynamism. It's a source of geopolitical strength, also a sign of good government, right? That if you have good government, your population is growing and prosperous.
You know, big population equals big military that you could use to fight, other countries with less people. Or that's how the thinking went.
And Malthus was one of the first to challenge this. What he argued was that if left unchecked, population will grow in a geometric ratio, so that every generation, population will double again. Whereas, he argued that agricultural resources only grow linearly, so you add the same amount every year, you don't multiply by the same amount every year.
But Malthus wasn't just concerned with math, he was concerned with morality.
So poverty is a result of the lack of sexual restraint. And that if people could just wait till they have enough money to get married and then have children, that they will be prosperous, their country will be prosperous. So he argued that this was why China was poorer than England, was because there were too many people there relative to the quantity of resources.
I mean, not for nothing, but that kind of sounds like the argument we hear today about people on welfare.
Right? Like, there's nothing new under the sun, Parker. Malthus's ideas turned out to be really influential in how England treated its poor folks. In 1834, England changed its laws to say that if people needed financial assistance, they had to go stay in a workhouse, to give them a kind of discipline. But his ideas about the dangers of overpopulation, those didn't really stick.
So governments throughout the 19th century were very, I don't know if I should say very pronatalist, but really we're embracing population growth as a way to promote national growth and national security.
And that stayed mostly true until the 20th century, here in the United States, when it was picked up by a new group of thinkers.
Particularly by a biologist named Raymond Pearl.
Okay, so this is back in the 1920s, and population growth in the U.S. was slowing, like birth rates were declining.
Kind of like now.
Yeah, and also in the 1920s, there was also this growing suspicion about immigrants.
Also kind of like now.
Yeah, which was a suspicion that Raymond Pearl held.
And he argued that, drawing on Malthus explicitly, he argued that this was a sign that the United States population was pushing on the limits of resources within the country. And so this is a sign that the United States is becoming overpopulated.
And so Emily said Pearl linked up with this other dude. His name was Edward East. And they made a bunch of noise around this. And neither Pearl nor East liked immigration that much.
Because he thought America didn't have enough to share with immigrants. There's no more room at the end.
Right. And also, Parker, these dudes were eugenicists.
There were also kind of different flavors of eugenics at the time. So all of the eugenicists were concerned about poor folks having kids. And most of them were also racist. So they were concerned about people of color having kids. But then they were kind of split on whether they were in favor of or against immigration from Europe.
I guess the U.S. had already basically banned people from Asia from coming to the U.S. with the Immigration Act of 1924.
And so eugenicists like Pearl, like East, they were really worried about people coming from, Italy and Greece and Eastern Europe and the Jews coming from those places. These are people who are considered white today, but weren't really considered white back then, for real. And for the brown folks who were already in the United States.
Eugenicists also promoted the provision of birth control to poor people, people of color, just as a way to reduce birth rates in those segments of the American population.
But a few decades later, something huge happened that blew up that idea. The post-World War II baby boom. It was to that point the largest generational cohort in U.S. history, and there was no economic collapse. In fact, the post-war baby boom years were some of the most economically prosperous in American history.
For most people, Gene.
And the second thing that happened after World War II was that it really made eugenics politically unpalatable.
Well, because of the Nazis and the awful things that they did.
Right, notably big fans of eugenics. But Emily said this baby boom thing wasn't just happening here in the United States.
Yeah, so in the really beginning in the 1950s, global population was growing faster than it had ever grown before. And a lot of that growth, really the bulk of that growth, was in the global South.
And Emily said that part made a lot of very influential people in the U.S. very nervous, like, well, capitalists.
And as population grew in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, American businessmen worried that their populations would become more powerful relative to the United States and that they might either have a communist revolution or otherwise nationalize resources and industry, which would cut off American business interests from resources and labor and markets.
I mean, maybe not surprising. Like, this was a time when countries were decolonizing and kicking their imperial overlords out.
Right. And Emily says that these big nonprofit foundations in the U.S. followed suit, and they took up this mantle. She said they funded the scientists who researched the so-called problems of rapid population growth.
We're talking about the large philanthropic organizations like the Rockefeller Foundation, the Ford Foundation. And the theory that they came up with was that with rapid population growth, people would be spending all of their money feeding and clothing their babies rather than saving their income and investing it. So the idea was that rapid population growth would be a barrier to economic development.
And the thing Emily pointed out was like, okay, that research had all kinds of methodological errors that population scientists who would come later would point out. But back in the 1960s, people who had a lot of time for the idea that too many people were being born in certain countries and that would bring down the world order, they could just point to all these studies that were being funded by big American philanthropies. And Emily says that the ways that people talked about this stuff, like population growth, changed.
When the idea of eugenics was starting to become a little bit suspect in the United States, we really see a focus on high fertility as the target rather than any certain type of people as the target for population control. And this was very convenient because fertility had declined dramatically throughout the global north. And so every place that still did have, I should say most countries that still did have high fertility rates were in the global south. And so you could say, we are targeting high fertility countries without saying that you're targeting people of color. But it was really the same thing.
And this was Paul Ehrlich's big moment when his arguments really got some traction. Like, Paul Ehrlich is still around, by the way. He's 93 years old. Ehrlich, though, argued in The Population Bomb that population growth would lead to famines, to communist revolution around the world, and that would lead to a nuclear war. But he also added a new wrinkle to the overpopulation argument, that too many people being born was going to wreck the planet.
And it was with that addition of environmentalism that population growth and population control started to he at least was trying to make them grassroots issues among the American left.
And Ehrlich's new version of the population panic argument kind of created this weird ideological stew among people who cared about overpopulation. Emily said you had hippies and college students wearing earrings shaped like IUDs. She said she met a dude who wore a button bragging about his vasectomy and that he was doing his part to defuse the ticking population bomb, you know what I'm saying? And they were all on the same side of this issue as fervent anti-communists and big American corporations and whatever was left of the eugenics movement at that point.
Paul Ehrlich himself recommended that food aid be cut off to countries that were already, as he termed them, beyond hope, and that those countries just be allowed to experience massive mortality. He compared it to cutting out a cancer.
Yikes.
I know.
So we're seeing just, this really dramatically racist rhetoric about countries in the global south. And there were famines, but these weren't caused by population growth.
But in the end, for all the predictions about the looming population bomb idea, what actually happened?
Parker, it was much more mixed. It took all of human history for the living human population to hit 3.5 billion people, right?
Mm.
That's what it was when Paul Ehrlich wrote his book in the 1960s. But it only took another 50 years for that number to more than double, to the 8.2 billion people living today. So obviously the population did spike, but like none of that resulted in global famine or communist revolution. And, famously, there have been fewer major wars since the end of World War II and the baby boom. And Emily said that the premises of all these breathless arguments about population numbers going up, going down, they're always a little too simple.
There is no automatic relationship between population growth or population decline and the economy or the environment. The effects of population growth and the effects of population decline depend on institutional context, the social, political, and economic institutions in a society.
One person I was talking to when I was reporting this out said that people who were worried about strained resources here in the United States back in the 1920s, those people could not have predicted, World War II or the baby boom. And that person said that, responsible demographers today try not to speculate in broad terms about what the future will look like because they can't predict the future. And ironically, a lot of these ideas we were talking about around the population bomb are still kind of floating around in this kind of mutated inverse form in the different strains of pronatalism that we were just talking about before, Parker. And Emily says that concern really started about 5 years ago.
Since the 2020 census, since the realization in 2020 that the birth rate in the United States is below replacement. So part of it is just this new data from 2020. But I think there's definitely more to it, and I don't fully understand it. But we are seeing pronatalism coming from several different directions. So one is this Elon Musk, Silicon Valley tech embrace of pronatalism, of population growth. So the idea that with more people, we can colonize the stars, we can have the human intelligence that we need to get to artificial general intelligence.
Then we got folks in that JD Vance wave.
We're seeing this resurgence of traditionalism, of the idea that families should be big, women should be at home taking care of their children, renewal of religion, of kind of pronatalist religions. And, it was interesting in the 20s, we saw people saying, okay, we need to restrict immigration because there's too many people in the United States. And now we need to have more babies so that we don't need to rely on immigration for the economy.
When we come back, we're taking a trip to NatoCon.
I was watching these speeches, and frankly, even as someone who exists in these kind of spaces and reports on this a lot, I was pretty shocked by some of the words coming out of their mouths.
The feminists, the child-free people, gay issues, trans issues, and anything else which relies upon the people who won't have children need to become once again low-status occupations.
That's coming up.
Stay with us.
Support for this podcast and the following message come from Betterment. Start investing in a better future. Whether it's saving for today or building wealth for tomorrow, Betterment helps people and small businesses put their money to work by automating to make saving simpler, optimizing to make investing smarter, and building innovative technology backed by financial experts. So be invested in yourself. Be invested in your business. Be invested in better with Betterment at Betterment.com. Investing involves risk. Performance not guaranteed.
This message comes from the Council for Interior Design Qualification. Interior designer and CIDQ president Siavash Madani explains why good design is so much more than looks.
Good design is never just about aesthetics. It's about intention, safety, and impact. Being NCIDQ certified means you've qualified to protect the health, safety, and welfare of the public.
Learn more at cidq.org/NPR. Support for NPR and the following message come from Rosetta Stone, the perfect app to achieve your language learning goals no matter how busy your schedule gets. It's designed to maximize study time with immersive 10-minute lessons and audio practice for your commute. Plus, tailor your learning plan for specific objectives like travel. Get Rosetta Stone's lifetime membership for 50% off and unlimited access to 25 language courses. Learn more at rosettastone.com/NPR.
Gene.
Parker.
Code Switch. So Parker, while I was trying to reckon with this notion of the population bomb, air quotes, and this notion of overpopulation, you were being pulled in a very different direction.
Yeah, I was pulled towards this theory that we talked about before called pronatalism.
Right.
Now, right now, pronatalists are worried about the decline in births, and it's not totally out of left field. Like economists and leaders of developed countries like the US or Japan are seeing their populations slow down in economic growth or even shrink in some cases.
Most global economies depend on GDP growth, and there's a certain expectation year over year that that's going to continue. So in theory, when the number of people starts to decline, you don't have people to fill jobs. You have too many old people who need care and not enough young people to take care of them and to keep things moving.
That's Julia Black, the reporter we heard from at the very beginning of this episode. And she points to countries where this has already happened, like South Korea or Bulgaria. And the picture is pretty bleak.
What happens if you have more 80-year-olds than 25-year-olds? Like, you just have a system that kind of collapses under its own weight. So there's definitely various economic impacts that start to look troubling. There's just no people to fill your jobs to, I think a powerful image is actually like a school that kind of empties out. Like, there are these towns where schools have to shut down because there's no kids to fill them anymore.
I'm picturing a kind of like post-apocalyptic world full of empty buildings and empty streets. Again, Children of Men reference. Stores filled with shelves that can't be filled because ain't nobody around to fill them.
And so do pronatalists. That's how they see it. So like a lot of far-right movements in recent years have been trying to move their ideas into mainstream American life.
The best way to insert an idea into the zeitgeist is through controversy.
So back in 2021, Julia was the first to report that billionaire Elon Musk, one of the most outspoken pronatalists around, secretly fathered children with one of his employees.
Messy. And now he has at least 13 children with 3 different women.
Yep, and since that first story, Julia's dug deeper into how pronatalism is becoming a growing tenet amongst some tech people and dug into how these ideas have become more socially acceptable. The other group promoting more baby having is social conservatives, Republican leaders like JD Vance, and people further on the right than he is. And even though those folks and the people in the tech world have slightly different ideas about which types of births they want to promote, they all came together at NatalCon.
That's the convention for pronatalists.
Yeah, and it's the sweet spot where right-wing influencers and Silicon Valley types meet up at a conference center in Austin. Julia attended the event.
This spring, I went to an event called NatalCon, which was quite a scene. And there were some pretty controversial figures who spoke there. There was Jack Posobiec, who's a famous right-wing influencer, a British YouTuber called Carl Benjamin, who's quite popular in the UK for kind of white nationalist YouTubing. And so I was watching these speeches, and frankly, even as someone who exists in these kind of spaces and reports on this a lot, I was pretty shocked by some of the words coming out of their mouths.
Like what?
So I think the most shocking speech was the Carl Benjamin one.
The marginal people need to go back to the margins. The feminists, the child-free people, gay issues, trans issues, and anything else which relies upon the people who won't have children need to become once again low-status occupations.
Now, Gene, I listened to more of his speech, and he went on to call people who don't reproduce parasitic.
Yikes. Oh
yeah, and Julia said it was pretty on theme for what she heard from other speakers as well.
I don't think anyone really spelled out explicitly the race angle, but it was pretty clear that most of the speakers were talking about preserving a white race. Just a lot of, this is a war for civilization, and every birth is a victory in this war, and stuff that, was sounding pretty familiar from some dark chapters of history.
It feels like a lot of this conversation is like throwing a rock and hiding your hand. Like, when we're talking about pronatalism, are we just talking about eugenics?
That's the thing I wanted to know. Do eugenics and pronatalism go hand in hand?
They're certainly going hand in hand right now. And probably, it depends. At the beginning of our conversation, we were talking about, at its root, all the word means is more births. That's not inherently bad thing. But the way it gets assigned to these nationalist goals and these goals of elevating certain racial groups, it's not long before people start talking about kind of natural hierarchies, genetic hierarchies, just these fundamental ideas that some people are born better than others. And once you believe that, they often want to start manipulating demographics to, again, elevate the people that they think are better. So does it have to go that way? Not necessarily. Does it seem to just about every time? Unfortunately, yes.
This is why you can look at the Venn diagram of, say, tech people and religious conservatives and right-wing influencers who hold favor under the current Trump administration and pin a very strong pronatalist stance.
I think that if you had to name the one thing that like white nationalists have in common with tech bro IQ supremacists, it's that they believe that literally at an embryo stage, this bundle of cells, one is better than the other. And when you see the world that way, you know, it's a classic like nature versus nurture argument. We've been having this argument for all time. But when you're really that much of a kind of radical, you lose all interest in equalizing society. You lose all interest in making sure that everyone has a fair shot. Because in your mind, a lot of these people are saying like, no, like the dice have already been rolled. The lottery has already been picked. You have your winners and you have your losers. So what's the point in taking care of the losers, basically?
Julia says there is an optimization component to how tech people talk about pronatalism. So kind of like a Build-A-Bear situation to modify a quote-unquote perfect child. So like a biotech company like Nucleus Genomics recently announced creating a software for genetic optimization, or Helioscope, which says they can screen embryos for IQ.
Some of these companies are starting to offer eye color and IQ, which is a highly dubitable claim. Like, what do you mean IQ of an embryo? And so, yeah, if we're getting to this point where science is claiming that it can offer each individual like a scorecard, I don't have to paint the picture to tell you why that's terrifying.
Nandita Bajaj, who I spoke with, would probably also think this was terrifying. She's an outspoken critic of pronatalism and the executive director of the U.S. nonprofit Population Balance. And she describes pronatalism as, quote, the unrelenting cultural and institutional pressures to have children that prevents us all from making liberated and responsible reproductive choices, end quote.
What I study when I study pronatalism is that reproductive coercion goes two ways. It goes when people are pressured or coerced into having children for other agendas, or people are prevented from having children for other agendas, meaning they don't have choice to decide if and when they want children.
She says that governments put policies in place to influence how many children people have.
If the nation state just sees women as reproductive vessels for agendas, their own agendas, then they can turn the tap on when they want more children or turn the tap off when they don't want more children. And that's kind of how women are seen as, reproductive agents.
And Nandita talks about how there are two ways governments do that. One is through coercion.
By taking away reproductive rights. By actually taking away people's ability to have children.
Like the one-child policy in China or historical forced sterilization campaigns in the U.S. and Europe.
Like the campaign in Puerto Rico and India.
And then the other way is through empowerment policies, things like access to education or birth control.
Countries like Thailand, Costa Rica, Bangladesh, Morocco, they're like, hey, let's give women control over their bodies. And what we are seeing around the world in every geography is as women gain greater choice, they are having fewer children or no children at all.
And that pressure to have kids is not just coming from the state.
I mean, our families, desire for grandkids. When are the grandkids coming? When are you going to get married?
Then there's media.
Romantic comedies or commercials. There is such romanticization of pregnancy, the baby bump, motherhood.
And the depictions of single people aren't always great either.
If you look at Vice President JD Vance, what were his remarks earlier on during the election cycle? Childless cat ladies who are selfish. He even suggested that we take away voting rights from people who don't have children because apparently, Parker, you and I don't have a stake in the future. Because the only way to have a stake in the future is to have progeny, which is what in today's administration is being valued and being constantly romanticized.
Ultimately, Nandita says no one should be weighing in on whether other people decide whether or not to have kids.
The only thing we should be doing is allowing people to choose what they want to do with their bodies. The government should not be telling us we shouldn't be having kids or we should be having kids, right? So my ultimate goal is absolute reproductive choice, which currently does not exist in most of the world.
And for a lot of people in the U.S., the choice whether or not to have kids has a lot to do with how much it costs to have them.
I know, right? Like, the U.S. is one of the most expensive countries to give birth in. It's also the only developed country that doesn't have government-mandated paid parental leave.
Meanwhile, people in places like Germany, Bulgaria, Japan get at least a year of paid parental leave.
And Parker, we haven't talked about the cost of childcare. It would make your eyes water.
Right. And to think, daycare is heavily subsidized by the government in places like Sweden, Denmark, Spain, New Zealand.
Yeah, man, like, you will talk to people who are like, I cannot afford a second child because I can't afford to pay childcare for 2 children at one time. Those are all big parts of why people are having fewer kids in this country. It just costs so much money.
Yeah, and Julia Black says the Trump administration has floated some ideas to help alleviate some of that pressure. Kind of.
The Transportation Secretary, Sean Duffy, put in a memo recently that he wanted to provide more infrastructure funding to high birth rate communities. The White House has been exploring policy proposals. You might remember Trump talked about a baby bonus at one point. He wanted to have these, I think $5,000 accounts for new parents.
I mean, families are going to need a lot more than $5,000 to help with the cost of a child. You know what I mean?
I know. And even though the Trump administration has floated these proposals and even issued an executive order to expand access to in vitro fertilization to help people have more kids, Julia says the real focus of Trump's first year in office has been reducing a specific type of population. Julia also points out that there's a tried and true fix for these countries that doesn't involve pressuring citizens to have a lot more kids.
Immigration will solve a lot of that. There are still certain countries that do have a very high birth rate, and so things can kind of shake out.
And it's very clear that immigration is not the solution the Trump administration wants.
These just draconian immigration crackdowns absolutely are tied into these same ideologies and the same thinking. So, yeah, I guess they're starting with that angle, and we'll see down the line what they do in terms of more promotional policy, like we'll give you money to have kids.
We've talked not too long ago about how the Trump administration has moved to try to kick immigrants from certain third world nations out of the United States, regardless of the status of those people. We've talked about this conspiracy theory that has a lot of traction on the right, that globalists, wink, wink, are trying to replace white folks in Western countries with brown people from the global South. We've talked about how fears over, quote, white demographic decline is a major driver of support for Trump. You know what I mean?
Right. And earlier we talked about the 2020 census as a point when pronatalists started getting worried about the declining U.S. population. But not for nothing, the trend line on the census for a while has shown that the country is getting a lot browner and a lot more quickly, and white people will be in the minority in the next few decades.
And that's a big part of why there's so much urgency around these issues, like right now. You know what I mean? Because like by 2060, for the people who are really, really anxious about this stuff, it'll already be too late.
Well, I'm going to be watching everything happening in the next year or two and knowing that it's not just immigration or just money towards childcare. It's actually all steeping in the same pot.
And y'all, that is our show. You can follow us on Instagram at NPR Code Switch. That's all one word. If email's more your bag, ours is codeswitch@npr.org. And subscribe to the podcast on the NPR app or, wherever it is you get your podcasts. You can also subscribe to the Code Switch newsletter by going to npr.org/Code Switch newsletter.
And just a reminder that signing up for Code Switch Plus is a great way to support our show and public media. And you'll get to listen to every episode sponsor-free. So please go find out more at plus.npr.org/Code Switch. This episode was produced by Christina Kalla. It was edited by Dahlia Martada and Christina Kalla. Our engineer was Gilly Moon.
And we would be remiss if we did not shout out the rest of the Code Switch Massive. That's Xavier Lopez, Jess Kung, Leah Danella, and Verlin Williams. And we got to give special thanks to Courtney Stein, the great, and to Lisa Hagen. As for me, I'm Gene Demby.
I'm B.A. Parker.
Be easy, y'all.
Hydrate.
This message comes from NPR sponsor Pete and Jerry's Eggs, inviting you to tag along with one of their organic, pasture-raised hens as she heads out for her day in the pasture. She and her friends start to roam and forage, hunting for tasty organic snacks. And with 108 square feet per hen, there's plenty of space for everyone. Under the open sky, they can hear songbirds nesting in the trees. They bask in the sounds of nature as they prepare to lay their rich, delicious eggs. And when the sun starts to set, the crickets begin to sing. Time to catch one last squiggly snack before bedtime. To learn more about Pete and Jerry's organic pasture-raised eggs and the certified humane farms where their hens roam, visit peteandjerrys.com.